Okay, guys. So the second thing in communication in the nervous system that we're talking about is neuron potentials. And we got to talk about two potentials. One, what it takes to keep a nerve at rest, which is quite a lot of energy. It's kind of a surprising thing. And then two, the action potential later, which is down here. So we're focusing just right now on the resting potential when a nerve is not sending a signal. And this is where I really say the salty banana is established. And what does that mean? Well, if you look at the concentrations of sodium and potassium, right? Okay, this is inside the cell. This lighter area here is inside the cell. And this is outside the cell. And it could be on this outside as well. But sodium, you'll see, is much more highly concentrated, 150 to 15 on the inside, much more sodium on the outside. And since when we think of sodium, we think of salt, this is why I call it the salty banana. And I think Bozeman uses the same thing, Paul Anderson. Salty, okay, because there's more sodium on the outside, and we think of salt usually when we think of sodium. Now look at potassium. Potassium, there's only 5 on the outside, but 140 on the inside. So potassium, we often associate banana with, so hence the idea of the salty banana. Okay, it's like we're like bananas on the inside. We have a lot of potassium on the inside, and we need to have a lot of potassium on the inside. In fact, when your potassium is low, you know what happens. When you're low on potassium, you kind of cramp up in your muscles and all, but also your nerves don't fire so well. So we need a high salt concentration or sodium concentration on the outside, very low sodium on the inside, low potassium on the outside, high potassium on the inside. So that's what we need to establish. Now, how does that establish itself? And how does it keep that? And why does it keep that? Let's start with the why first. Why do we have to have this difference? You often heard that there's like a slight positive on the outside of your nerves and a slight negative on the interior of your nerves. Well, that's kind of true. And that's due to actually the amounts of sodium far outweigh the amounts of potassium on the inside. So in other words, the difference, okay, is so much greater, and sodium has so much more of a stronger positive presence, kind of. Then there's other ions too, like chlorine, that come into play, but we're just going to ignore them for now. We're trying to focus on just sodium and potassium. So because sodium is on the outside, it has a strong positive as it is, and then it's more concentrated. That's why we say it's more positive on the outside. Potassium is also positively charged, so you could say this is a really big positive, and this is just a little positive, but we say positive and negative. Okay. Now, what are the players here? Well, there's 3 types of proteins, and this is the membrane of your neuron, and you can see the little phospholipids, right? And then there's all these proteins along. There's 3 that we need to be concerned about. The sodium-potassium pump, that has the little indentations in it. There's the potassium channel and the sodium channel, okay? So what's going on here? Well, if I was to look at some of these channels, and obviously you see a lot of potassium channels here and just a few sodium channels. But here's the thing about potassium channels. I call them leaky all the time. They're a little leaky. So are the sodium ones, but not leaky like the potassium ones. So you know how we have that banana on the inside, that potassium on this inside? Well, it sometimes leaks out. And when it leaks out, sometimes sodium leaks in, right? It needs to be fixed. We need to have a lot of sodium, salty banana. This is the inside, that's the outside. We need to have a lot of sodium on the outside and very little potassium, or very much potassium on the inside, very little sodium on the outside. So more sodium, salty, more potassium on the inside. So when these channels leak, and it's important that they do leak because it's kind of like standing at attention. Every so often, if you watch soldiers standing at attention, their bodies rock ever so slightly, kind of keeping them in check. And that has a lot to do with your inner ear too, but it's kind of keeping them in check. So this leakiness kind of keeps it in check, and we have to have that salty banana established. So what happens if it leaks too much? Well, here's the fixer. Here's like the real hero of the day, the sodium potassium pump. Once too much potassium goes to the outside or too much sodium passes to the inside, this little pump is going to take 3 of these circles, right, which are sodium, and it's, if any of them leak over there, it's going to pump 3 of them out. Okay, that's why there's this 1, 2, 3 sites, because it can pump 3 sodiums out. But at that same time, and this is taking energy for that, like, protein in that membrane to rock back and forth, like pump out this and then pump in to potassiums, okay? Because it's pushing more sodium on the outside and less potassium, but more potassium going inside, but 3 to 2, okay? That's what I mean by the more to less, okay? It's producing a high concentration of sodium, and it's keeping it like that, okay? So this is the worker, and they say that about 1/3 of the energy, so the next time you sit down to eat, take like 1/3 of your food away. That's what goes into fueling just these little guys in your body. And they're all along your neurons, and they're also all along your muscle cells too. So they're pretty important, and that's why like a lot of energy goes in. And it's ATP that's constantly causing that rocking back, good old phosphorylation, releasing a phosphate, and boom, bumping into it, making it rock back and forth. These guys are just leaky, leaky, leaky. They're usually kind of like, I don't like too much how they're represented because they kind of show them pretty open. They're a little bit closed, or more closely closed than they're kind of representing here. But they're leaky. Potassium definitely being the leakiest. Okay, and that's it for the resting potential. So that's going to maintain that salty banana. Next we're going to go into is the action potential.